Hey everyone, this is James from TDB bringing you another episode. Today I am going to be talking about what makes a tea expensive or perhaps too expensive. And using this just kind of as a springboard to talk about tea and price and things like that. Just looking over some of my old blog posts and just saw some interesting ideas for topics and things like that I haven't necessarily covered on the YouTube channel that I thought would be interesting to discuss here. Human beings are really rarely objective about price. I think often how we judge how something is expensive or not is often more by just what feels expensive rather than what maybe objectively is or isn't. So this is not to judge certain prices or things like that, or to objectively say like, oh, $200 cakes are expensive, or you shouldn't buy it because it's too expensive or anything like that. I think what people end up buying is going to vary person to person, and rightfully so, because people are in different situations and people are going to have different tastes and whatnot. So using this more as just a springboard to talk about certain things related to price. So first concept I want to talk about is how we often get anchored to certain prices. And we judge a lot by comparison. So what exactly does that mean? It's why something like a $100 ripe cake can feel really expensive, but a $100 raw cake doesn't, even if they are the same dollar amount and the same gram. So it's the same dollar per gram. So why is that? Well, if you bought a $100 cake of raw, you're buying something that is, as far as I can tell, still relatively about average and not too difficult to find in kind of the Western pu'erh market. Whereas if you are buying a $100 cake of ripe, that is usually something that is much higher than the average. Back probably 2019-ish, I ran the numbers or whatever on like the average raw being sold and the average ripe, and it was something like 30 cents a gram for raw and like 10 or 11 cents a gram for ripe. So there's a very, very big difference in kind of the average, and I think even unconsciously we are anchoring kind of our prices and our price expectations related to the type of tea we're drinking. So I mean, if you get anchored by something like a Wooey Oolong, your price anchor might be a little bit higher than something like a ripe pu'erh. So it doesn't take much to find kind of like old blog posts from like 14 or 15 years ago where people are reacting in shock and awe to something like a $50 boutique raw pu'erh cake. Now, obviously, in hindsight, this looks ridiculous because $50, if the quality is actually good for a raw pu'erh cake that's special, is not that much by 2024 standards at all. In fact, people would buy that up in an instant. But back then, they're like, oh, no way I'm partaking in this highway robbery for this $50 cake, because people's prices were anchored at a much, much lower price than it is now. Another thing I wanted to talk about, and this is really relevant to perhaps pu'erh, or any type of tea where you're buying kind of like a compressed form where it's in a higher quantity, is sticker shock is definitely real. Something like a slow burn on our bank account, so something like $6, $7 a day, or whatever, is going to feel less. A lot of people are going to feel that a lot less than something like so $7 a day, so that's $50 a week. So $100 every 2 weeks is going to feel bigger than that, or $200 per month, or whatever. And so that comparison is like kind of like a coffee a day, or I'm buying stuff as I go, versus kind of doing one big purchase. And it's also relevant because people might be like, oh, the dollar sign per this cake is more. In fact, usually the most efficient and cost-effective way is to buy something that might be a higher sticker shock. So like buying a big order of things to reduce on the overall shipping cost, even though the actual shipping cost number might look scary and intimidating. That actually is often the most cost-effective way to actually buy tea, rather than doing a lot of smaller orders here and there and doing it more by feel. Things like free shipping and 200-gram cakes are sort of these fun little consumer tricks that vendors will play. They're obviously way above the table and nothing hidden, but free shipping is not free, so really by buying a cake that is free shipping, they are integrating the shipping cost into that cake because they're still making money, presumably, off of that. 200-gram cakes, too, is a way to reduce that because like a $100 200-gram cake is 50 cents a gram, whereas a $100 357 gram cake, it's not quite half, but it's 28 cents a gram, so you're getting very, very close to that territory. So those are very, very different prices per amount of tea that you're buying. So one way, and I have done this for a lot of times to combat the sticker shock, is to basically always use per gram or per session, which is, in my opinion, a really, really easy way to calculate it and just to very, very much standardize kind of how we're thinking about price and dollar per session and things like that. I am personally becoming more and more and in favor of keeping it simple and not overthinking things. So in the end, I kind of land on kind of like these two kind of important questions to ask yourself. First of all, what is an expensive session? And second of all, how many sessions do you really want to buy? What is an expensive session? So I think in many ways, this is a way to sort of compare it with other types of categories. Now, this is also potentially a very clever way to sell tea. In fact, you have seen this in the past. Teavana used to peddle tea by the cup, which is a good way to peddle mediocre tea because it compares fairly well per cup versus something like coffee. Tea Drunk, a vendor in New York I know, has also peddled stuff based off cocktail price. Now, that is a nice way to justify spending a lot of money on tea, which, very well might be a good way to spend tea. But if cocktail is your standard, you're going to be kind of buying from the most expensive or towards the most expensive echelons of tea to start with, just because cocktails are pretty expensive and tea relative to that is cheaper. So it's a very clever way for these different operations to sell tea. So it's important to recognize that as well. But I think it's also a way to compare this versus something like coffee or just having a wine from the grocery store or from a nice store or something like that. And tea often compares very, very favorably to that. So it's like if your reaction immediately is like, oh, that's a $3 session, that is too expensive. I think the answer should be, well, maybe you should rethink exactly what we are thinking is expensive or not. This question is also related to the follow-up to this. How many sessions do you really want to buy? Now, something like a $5 session is not very much to spend in one go. Now, the problem is if you are buying 250 or 500 sessions of that, which a lot of tea people, and myself included, have done in the past. So it's very, very easy when it comes to pu'erh to buy something like 100 or 250 or 500 sessions all at once. So we should think really, really carefully about this. In fact, Marshall has talked about like hitting hard. And hitting hard, I have nothing against hitting hard. I think it's a good concept and things like that and makes a lot of sense in some contexts. But we also have to keep in mind if you hit hard and you bought 2 tongs, which I think is, I would guess that's about kind of average on hitting hard. That's 5 kilograms of tea. And so if your session is something like 6 to 7 grams, you're talking about not quite 1,000 sessions, but that's something like 800 sessions. So unless you are drinking tea really, really quickly, that's a lot of tea to get through, or if you're a vendor. And personally, I'm known as a tea person, but I don't drink tea that fast. So it's very, very easy to buy a year's worth or a lifetime's worth or a few years' worth of tea quickly. So I think it's a very, very important how many sessions do you really want to buy. And if your answer really is, I want to buy 500 sessions at once, that's why that $5 mark can sound expensive, because all of a sudden, $5 sessions is $2,500. Now talk about sticker shock. That's a fair amount of money to toss down at once. Maybe that makes sense, but I think for a lot of people, it probably doesn't. So we should think very, very carefully about how many sessions you want to buy. I think sometimes buying too many sessions at once kind of comes at the expense of having better tea or more dollars to spend per session. Experiences, and I've increasingly leaned this way, experiences are often worth more than kind of the act of accumulating tea. So buying samples, I've always been very, very pro buying samples, but I've become even more so. I think it's really, really great. So even if like your success rate on the samples is like, I don't know, 60-70% or whatever, where it's like 30% of the time it's not that good, especially for the price. Nonetheless, you're buying kind of these experiences as you go and things like that. So the fact is that if you you're buying a lot less, I think it's a lot more forgiving in terms of both your bank account as well as you can afford to buy have the occasional misfire when it comes to buying expensive tea when you're buying in small enough quantity that it hurts a lot less. So yeah, I think where people end on what makes tea too expensive are going to vary place to place, but I encourage people to think about it because I think it's an important sort of thought exercise in terms of how they explore this hobby, especially for people like pu'erh, people like myself, where accumulating a ton of tea is very, very easy to do. And so we should think very carefully about kind of the quantity as well as how much, as what we would actually consider a tea that is too expensive, because you don't want you're to sell yourself too short by saying I want to prioritize quantity over quality too much. Obviously, if you want to age tea or something like that, you have to lean a little bit into the quantity part of it, but you don't necessarily need to buy 500 sessions all at once. Okay, so hopefully that's some food for thought for people in terms of what makes a tea expensive or not. And let me know what you think, and I will see y'all next time. Cheers.